Do you feel that a lot of the diseases that we see in Western society start in the gut?
Yeah, I do. That's sort of the philosophy of my lab when we started, is that that's why I was alluding to earlier about paying attention to gut function, bowel movements, stool quality, all that sort of stuff, because early signs, and this is coming out more and more, early signs of things like even Parkinson's show up in the gut first. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what are these biomarkers in the blood or in the stool or through biopsies can we look at to say, okay, you've got a high risk now for this disease because you're showing the early signs. And then it gives people opportunities to maybe intervene, right? So huge impacts on quality of life. And then metabolic diseases. I believe type 2 diabetes starts in the gut.
Thank you to one of the sponsors of the show, and that is One Farm, a farm to supplement company that makes products designed to improve people's lives using whole organic ingredients sourced directly from the farmers that grow them. Where does it benefit you? I am so glad you asked. This month, they have a gut health superfood broth. This is a bone broth that has been enhanced with botanicals and adaptogens to help support a healthy microbiome and support better gut health. We have learned all about the importance of gut health, which is the new and next frontier of health and wellness. It's very important that this becomes more of a focus. I think it's been on the back burner for a long time. This bone broth has garlic and onions from organically grown heirloom garlic. Add 1 to 2 scoops to warm water and it's ready to drink. This month, One Farm is offering my listeners a free gut health superfood. All you have to do is pay $5 for shipping. Go to onefarm.com, add the gut health superfood to your cart, and use the code LYONGH to redeem. You can also click the link in the show notes to have it automatically applied, and you can check out some of their other amazing products. What about prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, all the biotics?
All the biotics. Okay, so let's define them, break them down. Yep. The prebiotic is like your fibers. It's the things you eat to support growth of your native gut bacteria, right? Good ones that you want to encourage growth. So we often talk about prebiotics as fibers because that's what we know the most about. My definition of a prebiotic is anything you eat that can encourage a beneficial gut microbiome community.
Would that also include polyphenols and the food matrix component?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that promotes, scaffolding and not just the production of beneficial metabolites, but actually provides support for the community. And a lot of it, we still don't know what all those things are. But I know it's not just fiber. So prebiotic is, the support matrix, essentially, what you eat. A probiotic is the organism itself, the bacteria. You're consuming the bacteria and hoping it's colonizing your gut for benefit. That's the probiotic, is the bug. So prebiotic is the food, probiotic is the bug. And then the postbiotic, there's a couple different definitions, but it's my definition is everything that community, that bacterial community is producing. The metabolites, the chemicals, the non-living fraction that is produced as a byproduct of what the bugs are doing with the prebiotics, right? But it also could include dead bacterial cells. It's just not live bugs. Postbiotics are not live bugs. But I'd like to add that it really, the metabolites and what the bugs are producing, that whole mixture should be considered as postbiotics as well.
Do you think that there's any evidence for prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics?
In terms of beneficial, I'm
putting you on the spot a little bit because the prebiotics probably have some good evidence for health and supporting health. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's, the probiotics seem a little bit like the Wild West?
Yeah.
There's so many do you think that there's benefit for probiotics? Does it actually change our microbiota?
Yeah.
Or is it just change it while you're taking it? Do you have to continue to take it?
Yeah. My view on this, and I don't want to speak for the microbiome field, but I would venture to be so bold to say that their view too has changed a lot over probably the last 5 years. And historically, I would say, okay, at worst, they do nothing. So it's not going to cause harm. And if you take antibiotics, definitely take a probiotic afterward to recolonize the gut.
Do you still feel this way?
No.
Okay.
No. Because there has been data to show that taking a probiotic after antibiotics can actually delay normal recolonization of your gut, which is what you want. You want normal colonization minus whatever you're trying to get rid of with antibiotics, and that the probiotics can delay that. The other compelling piece of data, and this has been a long-standing battle, is what's on the label of a probiotic is often not what is actually active when you take the product, right? So you might be paying $100 for a certain number of billion bugs, but you're really getting a fraction of that. So there's a lot in the industry that kind of has to change in terms of labeling. So that's one thing separate that none of us have control over for the most part. But then what colonizes? And right. And in other studies, they have found that if you already have the organism that is in the bottle, which probiotics we have naturally, they're normally occurring bacteria in our GI tract. And if we already have any of those bugs that we're taking orally, they won't colonize because that niche is already filled by what you already have. In that case, what you probably want is a prebiotic to encourage a bloom of that beneficial bug that you already have. If you're missing that bug, then a probiotic theoretically could be helpful to fill in what you're missing. But how do you know what you're missing? Well, you have to sequence your microbiome to see what's missing, and then maybe have a custom probiotic. And there's companies that are doing this out there, thinking that way. But at the moment, you kind of blindly go to Whole Foods or wherever, and you buy your probiotic and you hope it's doing something. And what I would say is if you are eating a diverse diet, diverse meaning, lots of your salads, you have your proteins, you have just diversity of healthy foods, don't take a probiotic. You will encourage natural growth of what you have in your GI tract. I think it can be a waste of money.
I'd like to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors of the show, LMNT, LMNT. When we are talking about gut health, we're talking about nutrition and hydration. LMNT is a tasty electrolyte drink mix. And in fact, as we go into winter months, I may or may not have it in a hot glass of water. It has 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. If you are trying to keep your weight low, this is an amazing strategy to manage hunger. I think that this is amazing, especially if you are training hard and sauning a lot. There's no junk, no sugar, no coloring, and nothing artificial. It doesn't have any fillers, and it was formulated to help everybody. It doesn't matter if you are keto, low carb, high carb, or paleo. Right now, LMNT is offering my listeners a free sample pack with any purchase. 8 single-serving packets. Great way to try all 8 flavors. Get yours at drinklmnt, DRINKLMNT.com/Dr. Lyon. LMNT offers no questions asked refund. Try it totally risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. You were talking about leveraging the microbiome for nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah.
And I will lay that at your doorstep because there's just, you did a really interesting study. And I think Don was a collaborator on this study. I would love for you to explain this kind of proof of concept study.
Yeah.
Or, I'm sure you've done many, but there was one really in particular that was so interesting with amino acids.
Yeah. This study stemmed from this concept and observation that first of all we're just talking about all these postbiotics that gut bacteria produce. We haven't even scratched the surface of what gut microbes produce and can do for our bodies for benefit. And so we got thinking about the amino acids and essential amino acids that bacteria produce, which bacteria can produce the full repertoire of amino acids, which is pretty remarkable. And in part, they do it for themselves, for their own growth, but they also release it out into the gut, and we know we can absorb amino acids in the GI tract. So that's really compelling. So
they have to understand, the listener has to understand how compelling what you just said is. We have this idea, we have 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential, which we traditionally tell people you have to get from the diet.
Right, yeah.
And some of your work really is pointing out that, whether this is for any length of time, the gut microbiome can actually generate these essential amino acids, which ultimately changes the entire way in which we think about it and also the way in which we may eventually speak about it.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
I think so. Yes, the fact that, the things we need to get from food, and we have essential fatty acids and so on, our microbes can produce these too. So, what does that mean for things like malnutrition, right? In other parts of the world where protein is not readily available, or for religious reasons, you choose not to eat meat, or if you've chosen to go strict vegan, right? And we were sort of struck by, an observation that the choice to become vegan is totally fine, but in order to have adequate essential amino acid balance, you have to combine your proteins in a specific way. And not everyone knows that. And the choice to go vegan may not come along with a well thought out, okay, I need to combine this protein to prevent deficiency. It may just be, this is what I like to eat, so this is what I'm going to eat. And yet, it doesn't seem like people are showing up at the doctor's office with overt essential amino acid imbalances.
Absolutely. Very interesting.
Right? Mm-hmm. So is there a compensatory mechanism? And we wanted to explore the question of whether microbes were compensating at a more mild state of choosing to be vegan or in a more extreme state of protein malnutrition. Where can bugs actually be helpful? And so we started studying this, and we wanted to, you can't create something out of nothing. So bacteria need carbon, they need nitrogen to create amino acids. And so when we thought about, okay, what would a vegan be eating a lot of? Well, fiber, more so than perhaps other types of diets, because it's a largely plant-based diet. And so we started thinking about, okay, could there be a fiber component where the fiber structure is providing an essential prebiotic for the gut bacteria to produce, in this case, maybe not short-chain fatty acids, but essential amino acids. And that was the premise for the study. And it was a rodent study. And we fed two different fermentable and non-fermentable fiber to mice, and then looked at a marker produced by the liver called FGF21 that is really sensitive to protein status in the host. And the first kind of proof of concept thing we found was in germ-free mice these are mice that we use as a tool in science. They have no bacteria anywhere in their body, totally sterile. When you protein restrict them, they have no FGF21 response. It does not sense that there's a protein restriction, which means that the gut microbiome is required to signal to the liver in some way that there's a protein, the host nutrient status. And so that was really kind of compelling, that this a system that has long been described in the metabolism field as being kind of the host sensor by the liver of nutrient status may actually be the first step is a gut microbiome, and then the host sense it. So that was kind of compelling. And then we did a series of fiber treatments with FGF21 as our readout, and to see if we could blunt or enhance the FGF21 based on fibers when mice were protein restricted. And we did. We found that one particular fiber, cellulose, which is non-fermentable, and a little confused by that, but influenced the gut bacteria and promoted the growth of one bug in particular, but others as well, that have the capacity to make essential amino acids.
And what is that bug?
It's called Parabacteroides distasonus.
And now these are rodent models. Do humans have these as well?
Humans have this bug, yeah. And when we went into the genes of that bug, it has the ability to break down cellulose, and it has the ability to abundantly make essential amino acids. So while we didn't prove cause and effect, there's a potentially plausible mechanism here for how the gut microbiome can be influencing how we sense, or how our bodies sense what's missing from our diet, and then also how we can manipulate bugs to produce what it is that we're missing.
And how do you see that translating over to humans?
I mean, theoretically, you would, in a state of, you would maybe test it in vegan. You don't want to intentionally protein restrict people, but you take contexts like vegans, or you go, there are studies ongoing in the microbiome field looking at protein malnutrition in Bangladesh.
So would that be kwashiorkor?
Yeah, like kwashiorkor.
And things like that.
Exactly. And you look in these populations and you see, can you give this fiber, right? And do you see shifts? Do you see a bloom of this particular bacteria in their stool? And do you see, and you can measure FGF21 in the blood non-invasively. So you can look in the stool, you can look in the blood and see, actually, is this happening in humans? So that would be like the human study we would still need to do before I would go out and make recommendations. But the thought is that maybe fiber and the fiber choices that you make can promote a certain gut microbiome composition that can compensate in these particular conditions.
You know, I think about that a lot, and Don and I have spoken about that for many years, in this idea of exactly what you're saying. And I see this clinically, is that individuals with different types of nutritional strategies don't have overt deficiencies. It doesn't mean that an individual is, say, optimized for muscle mass. So a vegan or vegetarian, or if we start with vegan, out of all my community, I have a really good vegan friend, and she is a orthopedic surgeon. She has done remarkably well on a vegan diet. And the question is always, why?
Right.
How is it that, one individual can do well over a period of time, whereas, the majority of my other patients, say, who have attempted a vegan diet, don't?
Yeah. And
I'm curious, thinking about the science that you've done and are working even on rodent models, is it that this gut microbiome in certain individuals are more adaptive to a vegan or vegetarian diet? And maybe on the flip side of that, certain individuals are more capable and will thrive on a carnivore style diet.
Right.
I mean, again, that takes out the fiber component, which there seems to be a lot of good data for fiber in and of itself, which leads me to think about, is it plausible that it's really about a cyclical way of eating that will allow for optimizing, a gut microbiome? Again, I appreciate that what I'm saying is a bit nebulous. It's this idea of, how could protein restriction, dietary protein restriction, be optimal for muscle mass? It's not. It's just not.
Yeah.
But some of the more conceptual type thinking is, there's certain individuals that have done this for long periods of time, and how is it that they are not overtly deficient?
Yeah. I know. I mean, and how long does it take to create a deficiency? I don't know if I have the answer for that either. But yeah, I mean, I think it could be that they, it'd be really interesting to look at baseline microbiomes before people switch over to the diet, to know, is there something that they have from the get-go, or is it something that kind of is a response to that dietary change that is sort of like, hey, we need to mobilize, I mean, we know that when you change, like when you go to, there's been some really compelling studies on, if you go from a higher fiber diet to completely eliminating fiber from your diet, over generations, bacteria will drop out from your gut microbiome population, and in some cases permanently. So you can lose.
That's not a good thing.
It's not a good thing, because you want as many bugs as possible in your GI tract, because diversity is equated to health. And so the more bacteria drop out, then A, you no longer have that bug that can carry out a function that maybe you needed. And then two, you lowers your diversity. But the idea that bacteria can, go extinct over time because of a certain dietary pattern has been shown in rodents, which is compelling. And that may exceed, if you're talking about generations, exceed the capacity for bugs to compensate. So maybe the compensatory action is short term. And then if you keep, it's like the bugs, they no longer have enough substrate, or they no longer can do it naturally. So you have to support them through some sort of supplement. It's really interesting. I mean, these are the questions you're asking are so important and interesting, and we don't have enough people asking those types of questions.
I think it's important that, again, we have some of these transparent conversations. One of the things that we see in the health space, which, again, media is so helpful that we are able to learn more at a much faster rate. Right. But the foundations aren't always there. And I think that we hear things in absolutes, and we talk about gut health and leaky gut, and it becomes very confusing for the listener and the general public who really want to know what the right thing to do is, and also to have less anxiety about doing it. Right. One of the other things that I always hear is the food allergies, food sensitivities, and I am curious as to what the role of the so is it correct to say microbiome or microbiota?
Microbiome is fine.
In the relationship to allergens, food allergens.
Yeah, important question. And fascinating because you have to go all the way back to the beginning for this, from birth. So our gut, okay, so first, it's an interesting question when you think about how is it that our immune cells in our gut tolerate all of these microbes in our GI tract, and you don't have constant immune responses. There's something called tolerance that occurs very early in life, where it's like a little tickling of your, GI tract and your immune cells, and you get colonized through the birthing process. And and it's a simplified community. It's not like 1,000 bacteria at once overwhelming the system. You might get like 5 different bugs, and they kind of tickle your immune system, and your immune system gets to know them and basically says, okay, you're a native one. You're not salmonella that you ingested. And so we're going to tolerate you, and we'll remember you, and so on. Then as you get colonized more and more, your immune system gets to know all the players. And so you don't have an immune response to all the sitting around as we are today, which is a quite interesting phenomenon in and of itself. So people are studying things like, okay, what then determines that early colonization? Because if it's not done properly, you might have an overactive immune system because your gut wasn't properly educated. So we talk about things like sanitization, right? So the 5-second rule, and kids playing outside, and pets and things like that.
5-second rule. Yeah. It's about 50 in our house.
Yeah, right.
It's on the floor. Good. That's dinner.
I mean, there's something to it where we have definitely seen a shift that in being hyper clean with all the hand sanitizers, hand sanitizers, if you remember, used to have antibiotics in them.
No, I did not know that.
Yes, it wasn't just ethyl alcohol. It used to have antibiotics in the hand, just, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. And people were just putting it on like everywhere. And so this became part of our, kids shouldn't be outside, kids are inside, and don't touch the dirt, don't touch the pet, don't lick the dog's face, all that sort of stuff. All that we know is actually good stuff to do is, get out there, roll around. Why? Because you're introducing your body early in life to environmental, what we call antigens, bacteria and things like that. And that actually can create a robust immune system. The more your immune system says, hey, I see this, your gut's getting colonized appropriately, great. Then when that bug comes in, maybe later in life or grows, it won't cause like a reaction. If you only slowly trickle in bacteria, your gut may not be fully educated until later in life. And then you get like this overt response because it wasn't properly
What would be an example of that? Say I don't know. Yeah, what would be an example of that?
So what people often study in this context are things like autoimmune diseases. Things that fall under that category could be ranging from skin conditions, even like dermatitis type things, chronic eczema, maybe.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. To food allergies, right? Peanut allergies, things like that, or sensitivities you might develop a little later in life. But I specifically think about children's allergies. That's an area that's studied a lot. You could think about things like potentially lupus, autoimmune conditions that are a bit amorphous with multiple causes. So people are studying the microbiome and all of these conditions and in terms of how your immune system is educated early in life, because your gut.
Oh, interesting. So basically, if what I'm hearing you say is that if you expose these individuals perhaps to a robust and diverse potential antagonists early, that they may not go on to develop obviously I'm saying this in absolutes, but autoimmune issues that seem to, I'm a physician who sees patients, pop up later.
Yeah.
And it's not for the fact that we haven't been testing for it, but an individual will not have, say, Hashimoto's or lupus or one of these other things until it seems, whether it's 20 or 30, pop up.
Yeah.
Not later in life, guys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, I'm not discounting genetic susceptibility to diseases.
Of course.
But most of these are complex diseases are multi-hit, right? You have multiple things that one thing will not cause it unless it's a, monogenic disease, like a BRCA1 mutation for breast cancer. And so let's say you have perhaps something runs in your family, right? And you want to stave it off. So how your gut, then that's where your gut colonization early in life and how your immune system was educated through your GI tract, because your GI tract has more immune cells resident than the rest of your body. So, and things disseminate from there. How that is educated early can, it doesn't change a whole lot after about puberty, right? So you have a window of early life to really influence a robust immune system.
Define puberty, just kidding. 40-year-old men.
I know.
No, just kidding. I'm kidding, guys. Kidding. That's really interesting. Yeah. And the way in which you would educate those individuals is to expose them to a lot. And also you mentioned peanuts. Would that be things like, I don't know, peanut, corn, soy, some of the, seafood, some of the things that seem to have a more allergenic component? Gluten.
I mean, it's, I'm not a pediatrician or a physician, because I know there's strong recommendations for what kids should be exposed to early on. But it sometimes isn't specific to peanuts. It's an immune response to some antigen that a peanut may share with something else as well. But it happens to be the peanut that sets it off. So it's not so much about giving your kids a lot of peanuts early or a lot of against those things. It's a general immune robustness, right? That you want to create through exposure to the natural environment. And so it can be done. It can be done naturally. And I'm not saying, I think it's common sense. How much is too much dirt versus what is too clean. And I think letting kids kind of be kids and get into things with their hands and all that there's probably a reason why kids explore so much with their the hand to mouth thing, right? Maybe there's an evolutionary reason for that.
That's interesting. I'd like to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors of the show, and that is Phorm. With the topic of gut health being so important, it's really about prebiotics and feeding the good gut bacteria. One way to do this is to make sure that you are getting polyphenols, which are reds and greens, fruits and vegetables. Very difficult to do. So I recommend OptiGreens 50. Comes in small packets. You can travel. I travel all the time. I throw it in my bag. I have it in the morning. I have it again before I go to bed. It is a greens powder packed with hand-chosen, it's gluten-free ingredients. It has a diverse blend of fruits, vegetables, grasses, which most people you're not going to be eating. So this is a way to get the components of a high fruit and vegetable diet. It is 100% organic grasses. It doesn't have GMO. If you care about those things, non-synthetic, botanical, phytonutrients and what we would call as superfoods, digestive enzymes, the whole 9 yards. Okay. You guys got to check this out. You can go to firstform.com/Dr. Lyon for OptiGreens 50. What about with animals in terms of individuals that have dogs or cats or other animals? In clinic, I often see if the GI pathogens actually, they say, oh, you can't get it from your animal. Well, maybe not directly, but there's feces you're picking up or whatever. I actually find it to be true that oftentimes when a family has an animal that is infected with something that the master, I don't know what you call it, but the owner has it. Mm-hmm. Do you find that in terms of microbiome, is there any relationship between animals and humans?
Yeah. So there was a couple studies actually where they did a household survey, and looked at, pets, people with and without pets, and they sequenced the pet microbiome and the owner microbiome. And obviously there's some dog-specific bugs in humans that won't cross over, but they found a higher relatedness of microbiomes between owners and their pets than owners and, the neighbor next door sort of thing. So theoretically, yes. I know that things like, so Giardia, dogs have Giardia all the time.
Humans get
Giardia. Yes. Yeah. So you got to be careful with feces,
Totally.
But, dogs lick your face and all that sort of stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily where a lot of that is coming from. But it's a fine line in how close you are with your pet. Just common sense.
Do not
again.
make out with your animal. If you are my patient, you know better. The reason I bring that up is when I'm thinking about it, you think about households where one family member eats a lot of the same food, whether they're all eating this, made this salad or this steak or whatever. But the idea that an animal is not necessarily eating the same thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe your animal does eat at the table, but typically, no. Yeah. And you're still seeing a similarity between microbiome is interesting. And just from an evolutionary perspective, why that would be, is it just close contact, or is there some benefit? Is the health of one individual, is this another way in which the health of one individual translates to the health of another individual? And on the flip side, if one individual is unhealthy, mm-hmm. does that also translate to the next, close contact animal or individual being equally as unhealthy?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting idea. Could it be nature's way of providing reservoirs of bacteria that are beneficial that can constantly reseed when, maybe. A microbe, if you think like a bacteria, its goal is to multiply and get into as many, other situations as they can get into. So that could also be the microbe's natural inclination is to multiply and divide, survival of the fittest, right? So that could be another just evolutionary thing. But with the native gut bacteria, environmental reservoirs are pretty potent. Like, you have a microbiome, I have a microbiome. If we live together, probably get a lot more similar. People have cohabitated in various ways since, humans are social beings. So there probably is something there that's evolutionary. I don't have the answer to it, but it's a really intriguing concept.
Where do you think the future of microbiome research is going? So at Cedar, is it Cedars-Sinai or Cedars? Cedars with an S. Cedars-Sinai, where you interface with a lot of different healthcare professionals. Where is the future of the gut microbiome going?
Yeah.
Just thought I'd throw out a really easy, simple to answer question.
Right. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the field. Unfortunately, we as scientists can't keep up with the pace of the public demand for therapeutic, interventions, but we're working as fast as we can. So one trend that is emerging that I'm hoping will continue is what many of you probably have observed is a lot of association studies. you take a diseased person and a healthy person, look for changes, and you find an association between a bug and a disease, but you have no idea what to do with it. The field is really trying to move away from exclusively that kind of work into saying, okay, those are great observations. Why? How is that happening? What's the chicken? What's the egg? So designing what we call mechanistic studies to drill down into the mechanism of that interaction is the only way you'll get to therapeutics or diagnostics that any of us can use.
So an example for that would be one of the bugs that is indicated as an autoimmune marker, I think, is Prevotella, right?
Yeah, in some cases, yeah.
But that's not it. Just because you have that bacteria, or maybe that bacteria may be more elevated, doesn't mean that you're going to go on to develop Hashimoto's. Or if individuals with Hashimoto's seem to have a higher influx of that bacteria, that's just association.
Correct.
It's not a mechanistic way of saying, okay, well, here's why this is happening.
Yeah, exactly. And to drill, and you can get at those. They're difficult, but you can get at them through a mix of using animal models. There's a real utility when you have a human observation to use an animal model appropriately to answer a question versus exclusively using an animal model to make an assumption about humans.
Right.
You know? Big
Which
difference.
is a really important
and that's
point.
A good way to pilot studies, but really first make the observation in humans. That's intriguing, great. And then you say, okay, I want to take the community from a Hashimoto's patient compared to a healthy person, put it into a germ-free mouse or a susceptible mouse that has no bacteria. Now they're colonized with that microbiome. Now I can look at liver function. I can look at T cell function. I can look at immune responsiveness to different things. And I can start to try to fix it, right? And through systematic ways. And then you can isolate the bacteria in culture and sort of try to manipulate them and really try to drill down into what organism is or community of organisms is driving that response.
What role there's a few things. Does stress play on the gut microbiome? Do we know?
Almost certainly.
Oh, we do?
Oh, no. I mean, you just think about okay, we have so many terms for anxiety that relate to the gut,
Yeah.
And things that are, and we know that people, when they get ready to go on stage, they tend to really want to go to the bathroom, so there's clearly a connection between how you feel and what's going on and the gut. So stress, I'm almost certain has an effect, but what is it? Is it
supercharges your gut microbiome? No.
Is it cortisol? Is it? I can't answer that. But there are people studying this, and it is compelling. It's just how transient is the effect and how long lasting is it? I don't know.
And I suppose the same thing would go for exercise.
Yeah, same with exercise. And definitely there are papers showing that, and it depends on the type of exercise, obviously, that different types of metabolic, marathon runners versus a sprinter, totally different fuel usage, different demands on the microbiome, lactate and all that sort of stuff will make an impact. And it'll create, different states of anaerobic, the anaerobic state of the body can influence the gut as well. Still emerging area. We need a lot more people studying exercise in the gut microbiome. The data that's out is compelling, but very few and far between, but almost certainly has an effect.
As a gut microbiome researcher, do you feel that a lot of the diseases that we see in Western society start in the gut?
Yeah, I do. That's sort of the philosophy of my lab when we started, is that that's why I was alluding to earlier about paying attention to gut function, bowel movements, stool quality, all that sort of stuff, because early signs, and this is coming out more and more, early signs of things like even Parkinson's show up in the gut first. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what are these biomarkers in the blood or in the stool or through biopsies can we look at to say, okay, you've got a high risk now for this disease because you're showing the early signs. And then it gives people opportunities to maybe intervene, right? So huge impacts on quality of life. And then metabolic diseases. I believe type 2 diabetes starts in the gut. I think local hyperglycemia can affect.
And why is that? I'm fascinated.
GLP-1 and GLP-2 are strongly influenced through the gut microbiome. So these are gut hormones, glucagon-like peptides. Really cool data just from down the street here at Rutgers showing that different fibers you eat can affect the microbiome that alters the hormone, the GLP balance that can affect your propensity, how you metabolize glucose and store glucose, and your insulin response. So there's some cool mechanisms coming out, but there's not enough of it for what seems like a very obvious connection, metabolism, the gut microbiome. But yes, looking at the gut, I think is a early signs there for long-term metabolic disease and autoimmunity as well.
And it seems that one of the great things about looking at the gut is you can do something about it because you're eating or you're choosing foods. And probably from all your research, when you need to take an antibiotic, you probably think twice, if not 4 times about that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about diet, but nothing will alter your microbiome more than antibiotics.
What about other medications?
Yeah, another really interesting area of research. And there are certain colleagues of mine who really are looking at what we call xenobiotics, anything you take. And it ranges from 2 ways to look at it. The drug can affect the microbiome and then have other systemic effects, or the microbiome can alter the drug and make it more or less effective. So there are studies looking at gut microbiome kind of inactivating certain drugs. And so if you have a certain composition, you have to think about your dosage of drugs.
Wow. Is that the standard of care yet?
No, it's not the standard of care.
How would we, as a provider, that would be amazing. How would one as a provider do that? Is it gene sequencing? Is it? It would be.
Yeah, it would be knowing what microbiome you have, but really, we only have this information for very narrow drugs. Like we have it for a drug called digoxin, which is a cardiac drug that's not even used that widely, but it was a beautiful mechanism for that drug and being metabolized by bacteria. And so we need we need people studying, like statins. There's people studying statins in the microbiome, which is really interesting. So we need more of this kind of work done to really understand the microbiome drug interaction.
Does that same model of impact hold true for, say, vitamins and minerals that we would take orally?
Yeah, I don't know. In terms of how they affect the microbiome.
Would, for example, if you took oral vitamin C.
Yeah.
And assuming it's in a delivery system that is going to interface with your gut microbiome, is there an interplay between the gut microbiome that perhaps makes you see less of that vitamin C or more, or the follow-up metabolites?
So, I would suspect that there is, excuse me, some metabolism there. I guess you have to think about where is that vitamin or mineral naturally being absorbed in the GI tract, and is there an abundance of bugs there? So a lot of these are absorbed high up in the GI tract. Your greatest density is in your colon. So there may be an impact, maybe minimal, but for things that are absorbed in the lower small intestine, the ileum, and certainly in the colon, then yes, I think we really have to pay attention there.
So what do you eat? Everyone's like, what? What is the gut microbiome researcher eat?
Gosh.
Pizza.
Yeah. I do love pizza. Okay, first of all, everything in moderation. I do not deprive myself of anything, but I don't do anything in excess either. So it's really important to me that my diet is balanced. I focus a lot on fiber. I really do. My meals are very... I rely on salads a lot with a mix of you have your greens, but there'll be grains in there too, and there'll be fruit, and you have the pectin. So I believe in the mix of fibers, and also I will consume the products that have fiber supplements in there, and those
I do too. I think that's
they've
really
come a
helpful.
long way.
Yeah, sure.
Made it really easy, which I think is wonderful. So I try to get the blend of fibers that way through either beverages or foods or the whole foods. So I eat a lot of salads. I always have a protein shake for breakfast. Usually a Greek yogurt mixed with a protein powder and fruit, and I blend it all together, or some kefir. So I always have fermented foods in my diet as well. So starting from the morning, in my salads, there's usually some sort of fermented pickle in it, and then at dinner. So generally, it's pretty low carb, high fiber, high protein.
I like your thinking.
And fermented food heavy.
And you've been eating this way for a while?
Yeah.
Okay. And was this kind of was born out of your research?
Yeah, and others' research, my colleagues in the field who are doing really compelling work. I mean, I'm a consumer of literature, and so I read these things. And when you start seeing enough consistent patterns, right, in humans and in rodents, and it's corroborating, you start to really pay attention to these. And the diet literature has really come a long way. So I incorporate the things that I see consistently, and what I mentioned is consistent to me. And I think there's probably a bunch of other things in the next 5 years we're going to learn about.
Do you think that in terms of the different more extreme diets, like the carnivore diet, do we know how that affects the gut microbiome, or the ebb and flow of adding fiber or taking away? Because I go through periods of time where you're probably going to cringe, but where I'm a low fiber person.
Right.
And if I do that, I'll maybe take a fiber supplement, something like that. But, in the winter, I tend not to really eat any salads.
Yeah.
I try to eat seasonally.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously we're in the New York area. Right. There, it's not like an avocado tree outside or whatever else there is.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious as to how seasonally, again, not just based on the season, but those kind of dietary choices would perhaps impact health and wellness. Do people become accustomed to that? How does that?
Right. I mean, so I'll address the sort of more extreme diets first and the seasonal. How you want, I don't have any, however people want to eat is what they feel good on and feel healthy on. So I'll make that caveat. But
except all day ultra processed foods.
Yeah,
like
I mean, come on.
The chocolate chip waffles that I may or may not have in my fridge for my kids, and that would be the freezer actually. Not that I'm eating those.
I wouldn't blame if you did.
I'm going to eat them under the table here.
Right. So your gut, I mentioned earlier, you want diversity of your gut microbiome. How do you get diversity? It's by eating different kinds of foods, because certain bacteria only subsist on one type of thing that you feed them. So you need to feed many different types of things in order to have many different types of bugs. So if you switched from your omnivore diet to a carnivore diet, and now there's several food groups that your gut is no longer seeing, you'll lose a lot of your diversity, and you'll only retain the bugs that help you break down the meat product. And your gut bacteria might get more efficient at breaking down the meat product, but you'll have lost diversity. So you just have more of the meat fermenting bugs, but you've lost maybe your short chain fatty acid producers, because those need fiber substrate. And so there will be certain things that then your gut epithelium is not getting as a result. You can take the fiber. So in that case, you got to take a fiber supplement, like no way around that if you want to have a normal, healthy gut. But you can't recreate whole food eating with variety, And so I personally don't advocate any extreme diet that's like only has a few food types within a food group, because you'll lose a lot of that diversity. So I put that out there. In terms of seasonal eating, I'm a big advocate for that. It's hard to practice that, depending on where in the world that you live. But there is great research in humans, and particularly in the Hadza population in Africa, where these are tribal populations, kind of hunter-gatherers, and they eat seasonally. And they have a wet season and a dry season, and there's the meat-heavy season, and there's the vegetable-heavy season. And their microbiome shifts in a very predictable way with the seasons. And they don't have overt disease.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they don't have obesity, and they're also active, but they don't have a lot of the things that we're plagued with here. And so people have been really interested in these populations because of that. What is it dietary? What's the lifestyle? What's the community setting? But there's the dietary part has really emerged as a driver for their lack of disease. And because the microbiome is so aligned with their diet, they're pointing to diet microbiome systemic effects potentially. So if we were to eat seasonally, there would be, you could do that experiment and see, but that is how our bodies were evolved to eat. Our bodies are still not, 2022 modern day bodies. They're still genetically back in, our hunter-gatherer days. And so our natural inclination metabolically and genetically is to respond to the way our hunter-gatherer ancestors used to eat. So it's easier probably to maintain a microbiome with that kind of eating than with our constant eating all the time and eating of foods that we didn't see until really recently.
Thank you to another one of our sponsors, and that's InsideTracker. I love InsideTracker because it allows you to take really good care of yourself. You can see what is going on, how good you're absorbing your nutrients, how well your body is doing, where your inflammation is at. Again, if you don't test, then you can't actually track, and how you feel isn't necessarily how you are. Therefore, looking into your blood biomarkers are key. You can go to InsideTracker.com/Dr. Lyon for 20% off. If you haven't done this, you really should, because you owe it to yourself and the people around you to take really good care of yourself. You'll get a daily action plan. You'll get some personalized guidance. This is critical. And you can go to the InsideTracker store for a limited time and get 20% off everything they offer, which is incredible. So if you have not done it yet, now is the time. I think that you will find it very valuable. You'll be able to implement and see where you need to change, and perhaps have and find strategies to be the best version of yourself. Again, that's InsideTracker.com/Dr. Lyon. I'm so grateful to them because they help me put this podcast out into the world. Would you say that the pattern of eating, you mentioned there that the constant eating, do you think that there is something to be said for feast and famine or intermittent fasting? Does that change the gut microbiome? Does it give it a break?
Yeah, we've been very interested in this in our lab. And we've done some studies on intermittent fasting, really looking at it from the gut inflammation side, not so much metabolically. And we definitely see that, a 24-hour fast, just one 24-hour fast in a week, this was in mice, but we also did this in humans, can dramatically shift your microbiome at pretty much at 18 hours of fasting, water-only fast. But then when you reintroduce back the diet you were eating, it kind of rebounds. But there are certain changes in the microbiome that still, even a week out, persist. And what we found, these are suppression of these harmful bacteria and promoting some beneficial bacteria. At 7 days, it starts to rebound a little bit.
Water fasting 7 days, but you mean that the bacteria seems to...
You go back to your native diet. And after 7 days of being back on your native diet, some of the changes still persist, but they start to rebound. So the thought is, what if you fasted now? We only tested a one-time fast. What if you started fasting every week, once a week, or a couple times a week? Could you fix those beneficial changes in time? And the idea would be hopefully yes. But what we could see that was interesting is a single 24-hour fast. We saw a reduction of all intestinal inflammatory markers in models that were susceptible to chronic inflammation.
That's incredible. And it was significant?
It was significant, yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. What is next for you?
What is next? There's a lot of areas we're really interested in at the moment, in addition to what we've already talked about. But we're getting really interested in genetic modification of bacteria for benefit. And so that's basically, I was talking to you about, we need mechanisms in microbiome research. One way to really get at some mechanistic, like, is this bug or this community of bacteria causing this problem? Or can it be used therapeutically? There are methods now that exist to go in and manipulate a gene that let's say you want this bacteria to produce a lot of short chain fatty acids, more than it normally does. You can go in and manipulate it and get that bug to produce a lot of short chain fatty acids. So now bugs can do things that are hugely beneficial to you, or maybe you can turn off genes that are harmful. And so we have collaborations where we can edit bacteria and then put them back in and see are they now doing more of the good stuff and doing less of the bad stuff? And test that, and then see if we can actually create some therapies out of that, and maybe potentially edit bugs to produce more essential amino acids. So you can actually give that to people who are vegan, or give it to people with kwashiorkor, children with kwashiorkor, and see if that's a tractable way to compensate through genetic engineering of bugs. And these bacteria they're not going to take over you can edit them so they basically do their job and die.
How would someone do that? They would ingest it in a capsule or
in a capsule.
In something like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Sounds like that is a potential interface for the future of the gut microbiome in medicine.
Yeah. I think, we need to, with all of the money poured into microbiome research, we need some, therapy. We're understanding a lot, but what's the tangible outcome from all of this work? And that's what I think the field is really trying to come up with.
Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Of course.
I know we covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And your work is really valuable, and you are a very fine scientist.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for coming on. I will put all the links on where people can find you and your lab and all your research.
Thanks. It was great. Thanks for having me on.